It is impossible to throw any doubt upon Fritz Lang's importance within cinema history. His German works, such as M, were deeply influential, presenting complex ideas such as the effects of social isolation, badness, and the immorality of mob justice. Less discussed, perhaps, is his American work, the films he made after fleeing Nazi Germany and moving to Hollywood, which, though perhaps not as timeless, these films often shared common themes of his earlier German work, reworked into an American context that allowed the films to be consumed by American audiences. The best example of this is his first American film, Fury, which shared the themes of M, but portrayed them in a way that was not only more easily consumable for American audiences, but more relevant to them culturally, showing that the film was often not as universal a language as you might think, and ideas and themes may need to be repackaged to respond to different cultural contexts. Taking place at a time where Nazi brown shirts patrolling the streets, performing mob justice, M is a film of the hunt for a child murderer. When the authorities fail to see justice enforced, the mob takes matters into their own hands and apprehend the criminal himself. The film's climax then evokes the murderer's humanity, that due to his mental illness, he was not entirely responsible for his crimes, and thus to punish him for it would be immoral. The mob retorts that due to this, he is subhuman, must be crushed. The film ends with police arriving and arresting the murderer for putting him into prison, resolving the tension of the film. This refutation of mob violence, coinciding with Nazi street gangs roving across Germany, assaulting those they deemed subhuman, is obviously intentional. Lang is showing the danger of mob violence through the lens of its time as a plea to the audience to not support such action, much like Fury is a proto-noir tale about a happy-go-lucky man living on the West Coast named Joe Wilson, wrongfully accused of theft while traversing the country and trying to meet a sweetheart, which leads to an attempted lynching of Joe by the entire town. He survives, though is presumed dead, and along with his brothers, orchestrates a revenge plot to try his mob for murder. His lust for revenge torments his mind, and as his would-be murderers are about to be declared guilty, he swoops in to announce their innocence. The film goes to great pains to evoke Joe's innocence, and that the reason for his anger later in the film is due to the injustice faced upon him. Much like in M, the idea here is to show how mob justice is inherently immoral, but many of these ideas were changed for the cultural circumstances of America at the time. Theory is supposed to be a reaction to a string of lynchings across the Deep South attacking African Americans. To illustrate this, Lang wanted the protagonist to be black, and to have him be actually guilty of a crime. Showing like in M that even when someone does a bad deed, mob justice is never justified. Here's where we see how cultural context forced deviation in art. American audiences at the time were not going to accept this controversial and political subject matter. Where German audiences could feel some empathy for a child murderer, it is unlikely American ones would root for somebody who was guilty, much less someone guilty while being an African American in the Deep South. Here's where Lang compromises. He makes Joe a white man, and he makes him innocent. There are still references to lynchings in the South, like here, where one of the film's only black characters immediately faces apprehension at the sight of a lynch mob. Despite the changes, the core ideas still shine through. A reputation of mob justice, a focus on psychology, and in the end, allowing the tension of the film to be resolved through the reimplementation of authority of the law.